everybody, my name is Tanya and it's time to start thinking about 2015. There are a few projects and goals that I have for 2015 and I'm still trying to work out exactly what I'm going to set myself for my bookish goals for next year. But there's a couple of specific projects that I'm wanting to do that I decided I'd make separate videos about. And so this one is one that I mentioned briefly in my required 101 tag that I did earlier in the year, which I'll link down below. And that is to reread all of my assigned reading from high school. So 2015 will be my 10-year anniversary since I graduated. I graduated in 2005, so it's 10 years this year, and I thought it would be a good time to go back and revisit the assigned reading that I was given throughout my years of high school. As I said in the Required 101 video that I did, I have read and revisited some of these books since high school, but there are others that I haven't read at all since, and I would like to see what I think about them now. Now when I am not forced to dissect and to study the themes and the meaning behind the books, and also just to reflect on what I take out of them now as opposed to what I felt about them then. There are some books from this list of stuff that I really enjoyed, and there are other ones that I didn't really care for so much, so I'm interested to see how that 10-year perspective has now changed what I think about these books. The other side of the coin, aside from the benefits and my personal want to do this, I thought it would be interesting to make some videos about what is actually assigned reading in Australia. I don't know that my school was necessarily typical of the rest of Australia. Certainly with VCE, the last 2 years of school, it has to come from a approved list of stuff for the whole of Victoria, and I presume the same for the previous years, but it's not quite so governed, I don't think. It's certainly something that I'd like to research a little bit more when I get further into this project, but it's certainly different to anything that's assigned reading in the US or in the UK or anywhere else around the globe. I've got one kind of modern classic in here, and there's a couple of usual staples, but in general I think I've been assigned reading that's very different to assigned reading that I've ever heard of. A lot of what's on here is quite obscure Australian titles, so obscure titles even for Australia, not just worldwide, but it's obscure here and that I would never have heard of if it wasn't for school. And then there are others that are bigger popular ones, and so it's an interesting item meld, and I'm looking forward to revisiting them because it's been a while and I'm really interested to see how I go. So in the early years, there were only 2 books that were assigned reading, which when I went to look up what I had for this, I was really quite surprised actually. I felt that we studied more, but we also studied films, and then there were kind of individual poems that I don't have anymore because it was just kind of a printout for the class, not an actual collection of poetry. So those ones I'm not getting to, I'm not going to be doing, but I do have all the assigned texts that we did. So that adds up to 23 titles over my 6 years of schooling. As I said, for the first 4 it was just 2 books a year, and then in VCE, so year 11 and year 12, I took up literature as well. So I was studying English and literature, and they both had multiple titles each at that point. So that's when it kind of balloons out. But at this stage, my general aim is to do, for the next 4 months, January, February, March, April, I'll do years 7, 8, 9 and 10, and then that will leave kind of the remaining 8 months of the year to focus on years 11 and 12. So I'm figuring I'll kind of divide each of them along 4 months each. Maybe I'll focus on English and then literature. I don't know yet for those ones, but then I can kind of spread it out later in the year because there are some longer things coming up later. So I don't want to talk too much about the books themselves because I want to talk about them in a series of videos later in the year. I'm still working out exactly what I'm going to do, but in general I'm going to do a video about each book, or at least with the ones that only have got a couple each year, and a wrap up or a review or something along that line, talking about each book and maybe some of the things that we talked about when we studied it. I don't know yet. But there'll be individual videos wrapping these up, not just in my monthly wrap-ups. So I don't want to talk too much about the books now, but I'll show them so you can see what's coming up this year, and if you've read any of them you can let me know. I would be very surprised if anybody has even heard of the majority of these. So let's get started. So for my first year of schooling, for year 7, I have 2 titles. As I said, I have Beware the Gingerbread House by Emily Rodda, and then I have Soldier on the Hill by Jackie French. Now both of these authors are quite famous Australian authors, but these titles, not so much. So there's that. In year 8, I read Came Back to Show You I Could Fly by Robin Klein, and Dougie by James Maloney. Again, these are quite popular Australian authors, but not so much these titles that I've really heard of at all outside of school. So, Year 8. In Year 9, I read Guitar Hobo Rose by Bridget Lowry, which I did talk about in my Required 101 tag, and Bridge to Wiseman's Cove by James Maloney, the same author as Dougie. So again, both Australian authors. So, Year 9. In Year 10, I read Looking for Ella Brandy by Melina Marchetta, which is something that I had read before I read it with school and really enjoyed. So I'm really looking forward to getting to this. And then the first thing that isn't an Australian author, and also the first play, and something that will be assigned reading in quite a lot of places, the first thing that's kind of universal, and that is Romeo and Juliet by William Shakespeare. So that's what I read in Year 10. Just realised that I also missed Of Mice and Men for Year 10. This was another one that I read in Year 10. And finally something that's a little bit more universally recognised, a modern classic that we actually read, and something that isn't Australian. In Year 11 for English, I read Montana 1948 by Larry Watson, The Divine Wind by Gary Disher, and some more Shakespeare, Macbeth. And then for literature in Year 11, I had My Brother Jack by George Johnston, which I remember having a bit of a hard time with and really not connecting with the main character at all. So I'm really interested out of everything to see how I go with this. I also did some Shakespeare for literature that year with Taming of the Shrew, and we also did a second play, and that is Hotel Sorrento by Hanny Rayson. So that's Year 11, and I don't think I'm going to need 4 months to get through that because we're still looking quite small. But we'll see how that goes. But Year 11. For Year 12, I'm confusing myself as to which ones were studying English and which ones were studying literature. So I need to do a little bit more looking into that before I get to the Year 12 books. So I'm just going to show you everything that I've got for Year 12. It doesn't really matter the division, but these are the books that I studied in Year 12. So we've got some novels. The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Night Time by Mark Haddon. The Hamilton Case by Michelle de Kretzer. And In the Electric Mist with Confederate Dead by James Lee Burke. Some plays. So Stolen by Jane Harrison, which is a tiny little thing and won't take any time at all. And then True West by Sam Shepard, which is within this collection of his plays. We studied True West and read one of the others, Buried Child. But there are 7 plays in this collection, 5 of them that I've never read. So I am planning to take the opportunity to read the other remaining plays within this collection when I go back and read these. And then we have some short story collections. There is this short story collection of the works of Henry Lawson, the Penguin Henry Lawson short stories. This is a number of his titles. I still have the ones that we studied marked up here, and I was highly organised for this one. I have little tabs down the side for all the different things we are studying. So I've got mateship, alcohol, religion, generosity, and women. This is one that I've read from cover to cover before, but we only studied a number of them in class. But again, I'll be going through and reading the entire volume this year. And another short story collection, Collected Stories by Beverly Farmer. Again, we only studied a number, and again, I was incredibly organised and marked all our themes on the side here. This one I've got loss, death, cultural differences, and alienation. So, go Tanya. This one I have only read the stories that we studied, though I haven't read the other stories in this collection. So again, I will be taking the opportunity to read everything that's in this collection. And then finally a memoir, which I don't have here right at the moment because it's on loan to my aunt, but by the time I get to Year 12 in the year, I will make sure I've got a hold of that one, and that is The Shark Net by Robert Drew. So that's the 23 things that I will be reading over the course of the next year. I think it's really interesting to look at the differences between curriculums in different countries and even different areas. As I said, I don't think we had a particularly typical list compared with the rest of Australia even, or even with the rest of Victoria. I think the choices made from the available options were very different from my school and the kinds of teachers and students in my school than there would have been from, say, a private school or a Catholic school. I'm not sure that my school took the most academic route, which I find is really interesting. So for the latter years in particular, I'm planning on going back and looking up the VCE curriculum for those particular years and looking at the kinds of things that we could have read in instead of some of the things that were assigned, and I think that's going to be really interesting. So let me know if you have read any of these books, or as I said, even heard of them, because a lot of them, especially the early years, are definitely obscure. Some of the later stuff is a little bit more well known, but so as always, thank you all for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye!